And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
And I'm wearing red for a variety of reasons today. The shirt, though, is for the LPGA US Women's Open in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at the fabled Lancaster Country Club. If you have an opportunity to get out today or tomorrow, do so. You won't be sorry that you did. And one quick mea culpa from last week, Memorial Day weekend, and I asked all of our listeners and viewers to do three things, but there was another item at 3 o'clock for 3 minutes to pause and reflect on those that gave their lives in defense of our nation. I'm really sorry that I missed that. It's again proof that this is unscripted, unedited, and unrehearsed, but it's something that we really as a nation should be doing, all of us, and it's something that very, very few people pause to do. It's actually an act of Congress from almost 50 years ago, and so we really should reflect at 3 o'clock on Memorial Day, and hopefully next year I'll remember to say something, but if I don't, make a notation on your calendar now. All the news this week is about the jury coming back with a guilty verdict in the President Donald Trump trial in Manhattan. You know, there's so much to say about this and so much has been said, but to me it boils down to this. This was a travesty. The American judicial system was politicized, something I've talked about long before Donald Trump was charged with anything, as being a huge problem in this country, something that should frighten both Democrats and Republicans, independents, liberals, conservatives. Anybody of any political stripe whatsoever ought to be worried about politics being infused into the criminal justice system. But here it went beyond that. It was weaponized. The criminal justice system was used as a weapon against Donald Trump and his campaign for the presidency. You really can't get away from that. So many people said, if this wasn't Donald Trump, would he actually have even been charged in New York? And the answer, of course, is no. But then he was, on charges that were cobbled together with baling wire and duct tape and string and all sorts of crazy stuff to make misdemeanor charges for which the statute of limitations had run into felony charges. Then you get a judge who absolutely was not only conflicted, but who didn't come off of the usual wheel. He was handpicked to preside over this trial. You got a jury, and you can make whatever comments you want on your own about the jury pool in Manhattan, an area that voted roughly 9-1 against President Trump in the last election. And then you got into the trial itself, and the judge so clearly had his thumb on the scales of justice. He was calling balls and strikes, but the strike zone was one thing for the prosecution and another thing for the defense. And then you got to the actual testimony. And the key was that the defense, Donald Trump's team, was precluded from bringing forth Brad Smith, the former chairman of the FEC, to testify as to what is an election law violation, which really was at the core of the prosecution's case. The judge denied that, and with that, out the window went, in my judgment, any real possibility of anything other than a conviction. But that was clearly nailed down tight when the judge issued his jury instructions, 55 pages of stuff for the jury to go to, including this, well, you can kind of cobble together any one of these three possibilities as the underlying predicate offense. Oh, by the way, you don't need to be unanimous in that. And so we get back a verdict slip that doesn't really tell us what Donald Trump was actually convicted of. It says he was convicted unanimously, and there's no question or argument about that. But where this goes is going to be interesting because the appeals process has yet to play out. Unfortunately, it probably won't even begin until after the election is over. I have no doubt that this is ultimately going to be overturned during the appeals process, probably at the first level. But we're going to have to live with what we have up until that begins. Some people are suggesting, by the way, that the Trump team go directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the left will howl blue bloody murder about that, but remember, Jack Smith tried to jump the line and get to the Supreme Court himself. So their hues and cries fall a little bit short of reality. I'm not sure the Trump team will do that. I think it is a Hail Mary pass, but as they say, if you don't ask, you don't get. But finally, when this thing is overturned on appeal, I'm always reminded of the Raymond Donovan line when his conviction was overturned on appeal. He looked the camera in the eye and asked, "Where do I go to get my reputation back. Now comes the aftermath of the verdict by the jury in the Trump case, and let's look at what that's going to be. First of all, the left wing is going to tell us you absolutely have to accept this verdict. You can't argue with it. You can't question it. You can't say the trial was rigged if you really believe in the American jurisprudence system. Well, I do. I absolutely do. And I frankly don't blame the jury here. The jury was hamstrung in so many ways by this judge. You know, I know a little bit about what it takes to try a case in front of the jury. I've done it. And I know that when the trial is going on, the jury bonds with the judge. I mean, here's this judge, he or she sitting up on this big bench in a black robe, looking down on the jury, giving them instructions, telling them what to do, kindly treating them, ordering them lunch, telling them when they can go to the bathroom, etc. So there's a tremendous bond naturally between the judge and the jury. But then the judge issues instructions telling them what they can and can't do in the jury room. And the instructions here were pretty clear to me the minute that I heard them as to what the final verdict was going to be. So when the left says you can't argue with that, remind them that when the Supreme Court of the United States, a court much higher than the trial court in New York, came out with the Dobbs decision a year ago, so many of them screamed and cried, oh, it was because of corrupt jurists. One guy took a boat ride with somebody he shouldn't have gone with, and somebody flew a flag upside down, and this and that and the other thing. They attacked the jurists by name, they attacked the system by extension, they attacked the process, and that was all okay. But for anybody to ask the critical, necessary, and appropriate questions about the Donald J. Trump trial is somehow un-American. But that's been their narrative all along, that they're the great saviors of democracy. And yet we saw in this trial democracy under attack because an election where the people of the United States ought to be making the decision, we got it infused into the court system where a jury of a very small number of New Yorkers made a call, not the call. Now comes the sentencing phase, and of course it's never easy to be in front of a judge in a sentencing hearing, but this one is particularly problematic because when did they schedule it for? July the 11th, right on the eve of the Republican National Convention, at a time when ordinarily all of the media attention would be on the Republicans and the run-up to their convention. They'd be getting that moment in the sun that always gives them a bump in the polls. This year that won't happen. It will be on Donald Trump and his sentence. And what that might be, Lord only knows. But whether there are any restrictions placed upon his ability to travel or move about, etc., remains to be seen. But let me say this, the American people see through all this. And if that judge up in New York comes out with something that restricts Donald Trump's ability to campaign, the proof is absolutely in the pudding, and the American people will be even more up in arms than they are right now. Already, this is starting to backfire on the Democrats. You saw the Trump website go down the night of the announcement of that verdict. Almost $35 million raised immediately after that verdict was announced. That is stunning. The people of the United States are responding. And so, in the old adage, it's time not to get mad, but to get motivated, because ultimately the American people do make the call, do make the decision. And by the way, it's not just on November 5th. That's when it ends. There's an awful lot of work to be done up to November 5th, including all of the early voting that goes on in virtually every state now. So let the Republicans and the Trump team be very vigilant. This is still ours to win. And for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.